Karmelo Anthony got 35 years. He never said one word, and that silence might be the most damning part of this whole case. A 17-year-old boy walks under a tent at a track meet. Words are exchanged, a hand goes into a bag, and less than a minute later, another 17-year-old boy is on the ground with a knife in his chest. That's the entire case. That's it. That's the whole thing in one sentence. And yet it took a full trial, 21 witnesses, hours of victim impact statements, and a sentencing phase that moved so fast it gave some people whiplash to get to a number: 35 years. Today, we're breaking down the Karmelo Anthony verdict and sentencing, what the victim's parents said when they finally got to face him, a detail about that knife that I think changes how you see the whole case, and the question that hung over this entire trial from day one and was never, not once, answered. Why didn't he testify? Let's get into it. First, some context for anyone who hasn't been following this case closely. April 2025, a track meet in Frisco, Texas. Austin Metcalf, 17 years old, is under a team tent with his teammates. Karmelo Anthony, also 17, walks over. According to testimony, Austin's team had a rule: nobody outside the team goes under that tent. Karmelo's coach later testified that having someone under a tent like that wasn't really a big deal. So right away, you got two completely different understandings of what's happening in that moment. Words are exchanged, there's a shove, and then Karmelo Anthony reaches into his bag, pulls out a knife that is already unfolded, ready to use, and stabs Austin Metcalf in the chest. Austin dies. Karmelo is arrested, and in the police report, he reportedly admitted to it almost immediately. No denial, no story about it being someone else. He owned the act from the start. He was charged with murder. His defense argued self-defense. The trial happened over multiple days, including a marathon 9-hour session on a Saturday. And on the day of the verdict, the jury came back guilty of murder. Then something happened that I think people don't fully appreciate. In Texas, when you're convicted, you don't go home and wait weeks or months for sentencing like in most states. The same jury that just convicted you turns right around, often within the hour, and starts deciding your sentence. So within about an hour of being found guilty of murder, Karmelo Anthony's mother was on the stand, pleading with the same 12 people who just convicted her son, asking them for mercy. The jury had a range to choose from: 5 years on the low end, 99 years on the high end. That's how wide the gap was, 5 to 99. They came back with 35. Now let's talk about what happened in that courtroom before that number was read, because this is where the case stops being about legal arguments and starts being about two families whose lives were permanently altered in the span of about 30 seconds. Austin Metcalf's mother, Megan, was the first to speak, and what she said wasn't long. It wasn't dramatic in the way you might expect from television, but it's the kind of thing that, once you hear about it, kind of just sits with you. She talked about her house, about what it sounds like now. Think about what a house with a teenager in it normally sounds like. The noise, the mess, the arguments about chores, friends coming over, music too loud, doors slamming, all of it. And now, none of that. She described her home as quiet now, just that one word. Quiet. It's such a small thing to say, but it tells you everything about what's actually been lost here. Not in some abstract legal sense. In the actual day-to-day, sound of the house sense. She also pointed out something about how, for everyone covering this case, for the journalists, for the people online with their hot takes, this is a story, something to follow, something to have an opinion about. But for her family, this isn't a story. It's just life now, every single day, forever. And then she made a distinction that I think is one of the most important things said in this entire case. She didn't say her son died. She specifically rejected that framing. She said he was taken from them. And there's a real difference there. Dying is something that happens to a person. Being taken is something someone does, an action, a choice made by another human being. And she made sure Karmelo Anthony understood that's how she sees it. She closed by addressing the sentence directly. And essentially what she said was, he should consider himself lucky to get 35 years because what she's been handed is a life sentence without her son for the rest of her life. Sit with that comparison for a second. 35 years sounds like a long time, and it is. But she's right that it has an end date. Karmelo Anthony will, assuming he survives that long, walk out of a prison someday as a man in his 50s, with decades of life still ahead of him. Austin Metcalf doesn't get an end date on anything. He doesn't get to turn 54. He doesn't get to graduate. He doesn't get to be there for his twin brother Hunter at any future milestone for either of their lives. According to local reporters who were in that Dallas courtroom, Karmelo Anthony spent most of this looking down. Not at her, down. And then it was Austin's father's turn. If Megan Metcalf's statement was about absence, about the quiet house and the missing future, what Jeff Metcalf said was something else entirely, and he named it directly. He talked about how people assume grief looks like sadness, like crying, like quietly falling apart on the inside, and he said, no, that's not what it actually is, not for him. For him, it's rage, pure unfiltered rage. And he wasn't apologizing for that, not even a little. Honestly, I think that might be one of the most honest things I've ever heard a parent say in a moment like this. We've all absorbed this cultural script for what grief is supposed to look like. Tears, sadness, maybe some anger eventually, but mostly sadness. And here's a man standing in front of an entire courtroom basically saying, forget the script, this is rage. And I'm allowed to feel that. He also brought up something that, honestly, I think got completely buried under everything else going on in this case. He talked about being swatted multiple times, 6 separate incidents going back to right after this happened. For anyone who doesn't know what that means, swatting is when someone calls in a fake emergency, like a hostage situation or an active shooter, to a specific address with the goal of getting armed police to show up at someone's door. 6 times since his son was murdered. Just think about that for a second. This man's child was killed, and in the aftermath, instead of being left alone to grieve, he became a target himself. Strangers online, people who know absolutely nothing about this family beyond a headline they scrolled past, decided the right move was to send armed police to a grieving father's house 6 different times. He talked about how this whole thing changed him at a fundamental level, that the version of him that existed before this doesn't really exist anymore. Like, this event ended one person and left someone else behind in his place. And then he said something that, honestly, takes an enormous amount of composure, especially given everything he'd just laid out. He drew a line between forgiving the person and forgiving what was done. He said he forgave Karmelo Anthony as a person on the day this happened, but he does not forgive the act itself. Those are 2 separate things for him, and he holds both of them at the same time. That's a distinction a lot of people couldn't even put into words, let alone actually live by. I'm not sure I could, but here's where it gets harder to watch. Jeff Metcalf asked Karmelo Anthony directly to look at him. He told him not to look down, and according to the reporting, Karmelo Anthony did not make eye contact. Not during this, not during any part of it. What Jeff Metcalf said next is something I think is going to stick with anyone who hears about this case. He pointed out the contradiction sitting right there in front of everyone. That Karmelo couldn't bring himself to look him in the eyes in that moment, but he'd had no problem putting a knife into his son's chest. And reporters who were in that courtroom described Jeff Metcalf standing just a couple of feet away, staring directly at Karmelo Anthony the entire time he was walked past him. I keep picturing that. A father standing his ground, eyes locked on the person who killed his son, while that person stares at the floor. Now I want to shift gears for a second, because there's something else about this case that I genuinely think deserves way more attention than it's gotten. And it's not about the emotion of the courtroom. It's about a decision, a specific deliberate decision made by Karmelo Anthony and his defense team. He never testified, not at trial, not at sentencing. Not once in any phase of this case did Karmelo Anthony speak for himself. And before we go further, here's the detail about that knife I mentioned at the start, because this is where it really lands. We already know the knife wasn't folded when he pulled it out. It was already open, ready to go, which means before any physical contact had even escalated past a shove, his hand was already in that bag on that knife, prepped. Now hold that thought, because here's why it matters so much that he never explained any of this himself. Here's the thing about claiming self-defense. When you say, I acted in self-defense, you're not saying I didn't do this. You're saying I did this, and here's why it was justified. You're admitting the act and asking the jury to excuse it based on what was going on in your head. Were you afraid? Did you believe you were in real danger? Did that danger feel serious enough to justify pulling a weapon? But here's the catch. Only one person on this entire planet knows what was actually going on inside Karmelo Anthony's head in that moment. Only one person could tell the jury, I was scared. Here's what I was thinking when my hand went into that bag. That person never spoke. Not one word. Think about what the jury actually had in front of them. 21 witnesses for the prosecution, a lot of them Austin's friends and teammates. People standing right there when it happened. And every single one of them said this didn't look like self-defense. Then the defense called their own witnesses. And even among those, including someone who wasn't even connected to either school, nobody backed up the self-defense claim either. So picture this. A jury is being asked to send a confessed killer home, free, and literally 0 people, including the person on trial, are telling them why that would be the right call. There were 3 questions hanging over this entire case. Why bring a knife to a track meet in the first place? Why go under that tent when you know you're not supposed to? And why not just leave when you're asked to? Those 3 questions sat there, unanswered, for the entire trial. And here's what really gets me. Legal commentators who've covered cases like this for years said they were genuinely thrown by this decision. Not in a well, that's a valid strategy, just unconventional way. More like a this doesn't add up way. The general reaction from people who watch trials for a living was basically, this decision boggles the mind. Because when a defendant pleads self-defense and then doesn't testify, there's really only 2 explanations that make sense. Either the defense felt so confident they didn't think they needed it, which clearly wasn't the case here given the outcome. Or, and this is the uncomfortable one, they were worried that if Karmelo Anthony got up there and had to answer those 3 questions under cross-examination, things might not hold together. I want to be careful here. I'm not saying that's definitely what happened. But when people who've sat through hundreds of these trials say they're shocked, that tells you something. And here's the part that really gets me. Even after the guilty verdict, even at sentencing, when the question was no longer, are you going to prison, but for how long, Karmelo Anthony still said nothing. At that stage, you're not trying to prove your innocence anymore. That's done. What you're trying to do is show the jury who you actually are. Some remorse, some explanation in your own words for what was going through your head. Maybe enough to nudge that number from 99 down toward 20. People do this all the time. They get up, admit what they did, say they wish they could take it back, that they were scared, that they made a horrible decision. It doesn't fix anything, but it can move the needle. Sometimes it's the difference between 15 years and 35. Karmelo Anthony didn't do that either. The only person who said anything resembling remorse on his behalf was his mother. She told the jury she believes her son is sorry for what happened. Not him, his mom, speaking for him about his own feelings. Let's go back to that touch me, see what happens moment, because I think this single phrase ends up defining how a lot of people will remember this entire case. According to testimony, in the moments right before the stabbing, there was a back and forth. And the phrase that kept coming up, repeated more than once according to witnesses, was some version of touch me, see what happens. And he was saying this with his hand already inside that bag on the knife. That's not the language of someone who's scared and trying to back away from a situation. That's a challenge, almost an invitation for things to escalate. And this is exactly why the idea of sudden passion never really held up here. If the jury had found sudden passion, the sentencing range would have dropped dramatically, down to somewhere between 2 and 20 years instead of 5 to 99. It's the kind of finding you sometimes see when, in an intense, overwhelming moment, someone reacts in a way they normally never would. A reaction, not a plan. But touch me, see what happens, said more than once. Hand already on an open knife, that doesn't read like someone overwhelmed in the moment. That reads like someone who already knew exactly what was going to happen if things escalated and was almost daring it to. By the time the jury landed on murder instead of something lesser, That door for sudden passion had basically already closed. You can't argue this happened in a flash of overwhelming emotion once a jury has already decided it was intentional. I want to zoom out here for a second because there's a bigger question worth asking. And it's not really a legal one, it's just a human one. What was this actually about? Strip away the trial, the witnesses, all the legal back and forth. What was the actual fight here? A teenager walked under a tent he wasn't supposed to be under.
Yeah, they were fast.
Another
We're up
teenager
next.
told him to leave.
Grab
Words
some
got
water before you
heated.
head out.
There was a shove. And the response to that shove was a knife in the chest. I've tried to find a version of this where that escalation makes sense, and I can't get there. Even if everything Karmelo's side argued about tent culture, about a friend possibly waving him over, about the rules being looser than Austin's team treated them, even if every bit of that is true, none of it bridges the gap between you need to leave and I'm going to kill you. And honestly, that's what this verdict reflects. The jury wasn't deciding whether Karmelo Anthony stabbed Austin Metcalf. Nobody disputed that. He admitted it from the start. What they were deciding was whether whatever happened in that moment, the words, the shove, justified ending someone's life. And their answer was no. A pretty resounding no, given that they came back with murder rather than something lesser. Let's talk about the number itself, because 35 years means very different things depending on who you ask. To Austin's family, it probably feels insufficient in some fundamental way, because no number gives them their son back. There's no sentence long enough to make that house not quiet anymore. To some legal commentators, 35 actually represents a real break for Karmelo Anthony. Here's why. In Texas, he becomes eligible for parole at 50% of the sentence. So somewhere around his mid-30s, he could be walking out of prison, still young, still with decades ahead of him. The exact thing that was permanently taken from Austin at 17. And remember the range here, 5 years on one end, 99 on the other. 12 people had to find agreement somewhere in that massive gap without just averaging numbers, which they're not supposed to do. They landed on 35. Is that the right number? I honestly don't think there's a clean answer. If you ask Austin's family, I'd guess no number feels right, because the thing they actually want isn't on the table. If you're just looking at it from a what message does this send angle, 35 years for an admitted, intentional stabbing of an unarmed teenager where the person responsible never once explained themselves, feels like it could have gone higher. But here's something else I keep thinking about. I think the silence, all of it, through the trial and through sentencing, may have actually cost Karmelo Anthony. Not legally, not in terms of an appeal, but in terms of that final number. Juries are made of people, and people respond to other people. A defendant who gets up, owns what they did, shows real remorse, explains their fear in their own words, even if it doesn't excuse anything, gives the jury something to hold on to, some small thread they can use to justify going easier. Karmelo Anthony gave them nothing. No explanation, no remorse in his own voice. Not even eye contact when a grieving father directly asked for it in the rawest moment of the entire case. I think that absence was felt, and I think it's part of why the number landed where it did. Quick note on appeals, because this has come up a lot online. There's been talk about whether this could get overturned on ineffective counsel. Realistically, that's an extremely high bar. We're talking about cases where defense attorneys have literally fallen asleep during trial, and even then courts haven't always agreed that counts as ineffective. There were some odd moments here, like witnesses making what amounted to legal conclusions about self-defense, which technically isn't their call to make. That could theoretically come up on appeal, but could come up is very different from will overturn a murder conviction. Barring something extraordinary, 35 years is very likely the number that sticks. One last thing before we wrap up, because I think it matters for understanding the environment around this whole trial. After Karmelo Anthony's arrest back in April, an online fundraiser was set up for his family.
I can't believe it's still
climbing.
climbing.
Not on GoFundMe, since they don't allow fundraisers for people accused of violent crimes, but on a similar platform, that fundraiser ended up pulling in close to $700,000. After the guilty verdict, it was shut down with a statement saying all the funds had been distributed lawfully for pre-trial expenses. I'm not here to tell you what to think about that fundraiser existing. People support who they want for all kinds of reasons, and legal costs are real and expensive. But sit with the contrast for a second. One family received almost $700,000 in public support during a murder trial. The other family had armed police sent to their home 6 separate times. One family is fundraising. The other has a quiet house. Both of those things happened at the same time in the same case to 2 families just trying to get through something neither of them ever should have had to face. So where does this leave us? A 17-year-old is dead. Another 17-year-old is going to spend at least the next 17 years, possibly much longer, in prison. 2 families have been permanently rearranged. One has an empty chair at every holiday for the rest of their lives. The other has a son who, if he serves the full sentence, will be in his mid-50s when he gets out, having spent his entire adult life behind bars. Every birthday, every holiday, every ordinary Tuesday, and in the middle of all of it sits this question that was never answered. Why? Why bring a knife? Why go under that tent? Why not just walk away when asked? Karmelo Anthony had every chance, at trial and at sentencing, to answer those questions in his own words. To look Jeff Metcalf in the eye like he was asked to and explain himself. Whatever that explanation might have been, he chose not to. And now he has 35 years to think about whether that was the right call. If you ask me, the silence in that courtroom said more than any statement ever could have. Not because silence equals guilt, the jury already settled that part, but because in a case that always came down to one single question, why, the only person who could have answered it chose not to. And Austin Metcalf's family will spend the rest of their lives without that answer. If you made it this far, drop a comment and let me know what you think the right sentence should have been. 5 years, 35, 99. And whether you things would have gone differently if Karmelo Anthony had actually testified. If you're new here, subscribe. We cover cases like this every week with real analysis, not just headlines. See you in the next one.